On a frigid winter night, a violent snowstorm trapped Kathy Castillo and her young son, Jason, inside their cold, decaying house. No heat, no hope. When a desperate knock echoed through the howling wind, Kathy opened the door to find a shivering biker, Andrew Gillespie, barely able to stand. His body frozen, his motorcycle stalled outside. He had nowhere else to turn. Jason, with his untainted heart, looked up and said, "Come in, I'll care for you." Little did they know, this simple act of kindness would unleash a series of events that would forever alter the course of their lives. Kathy Castillo never thought her life would become a daily struggle. After her divorce, she found herself alone, raising her 5-year-old son Jason with little more than the hope of getting through another day. She worked long, exhausting hours at the diner, trying to scrape together enough for rent, groceries, and the bills that always seemed to pile up higher than she could reach. Every dollar was stretched thin, and every evening she went to bed wondering how they would get by the next day. Their house, a small, run-down structure on the edge of town, wasn't much more than a shell. The heater had been broken for weeks, and Kathy had no way to fix it. She kept Jason bundled up in layers of old clothes and blankets, trying to keep him warm while the biting winter air crept through the cracks in the walls. It felt like everything around them was slowly falling apart, and Kathy wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. Despite the constant struggle, Jason remained the light in Kathy's life. He was a bright, loving child, wise beyond his years in ways no 5-year-old should be. While Kathy worked, Jason found ways to keep their spirits high, whether it was pretending to fix the roof with his toy tools or making her laugh with his innocent observations about the world. Even though their lives were far from easy, Jason's small gestures of love made everything feel a little more bearable. He was always there, a reminder that love could still shine through the darkest moments. But that night, as the storm raged outside, Kathy felt the weight of everything crushing down on her. The house grew colder by the minute, the wind howling against the walls, and she wondered just how much longer they could endure. She had no money to fix the heater, no way to escape the isolation. Jason, always the optimist, was quiet tonight, and that only deepened Kathy's sense of dread. As the storm worsened, the house seemed to close in around them, and Kathy felt more alone than ever. And then there came a knock. Have you ever faced a moment when it felt like everything was closing in, only for a small act of kindness to change everything? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps bring more heartfelt stories your way, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's get into the story. The storm was relentless. The wind howled, rattling the windows and pushing the snow in every direction, blinding the world outside. Kathy hugged her arms tightly around herself, the cold seeping into her bones despite the layers of clothing she wore. She tried to focus on the sound of Jason's breathing, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest from where he sat curled up on the worn couch. But even his soft sighs seemed distant now, swallowed by the angry storm raging around them. Her eyes darted around the dim room, watching the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight. The house creaked under the weight of the storm, the cracks in the walls letting in more cold than Kathy cared to think about. She could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her, each gust of wind a reminder of how small and powerless she felt. The heater had been broken for weeks. She couldn't afford the repairs, let alone a new one. The firewood she had stocked up for the winter was dwindling, and with each passing hour, the cold seemed to creep deeper into the house, into her soul. Jason had grown quiet since the storm started, his usual chatter and playful energy replaced by the stillness of someone too tired to keep up the charade. He was only 5, but Kathy could see it in his eyes, the same worry, the same fear she had hidden away for so long. "Mom!" Jason's voice broke through her thoughts, soft and uncertain. She turned to him, trying to offer a reassuring smile, but the corners of her mouth barely moved. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think we'll be okay?" His words hung in the air like a heavy weight, a question that Kathy had no easy answer for. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to scare him. So she simply nodded, even though her heart wasn't in it. "We'll be okay, baby. We just have to make it through the night." But as the storm howled louder, Kathy felt the truth creeping up on her. She wasn't sure they would make it through the night. The roof leaked in several places, and the cold seemed to wrap around them like a vice. They couldn't stay like this. She needed help. But who would help them? There was no one. Just as she began to sink deeper into the weight of her thoughts, a sound broke through the wind, the unmistakable thud of a knock on the door. Kathy froze, her pulse quickening. Who in the world would be out there in this storm? The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. Kathy's heart raced as she stood up, her knees weak beneath her. She felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. Was it someone who needed help? Or worse, someone who meant them harm? The door wasn't secure, and she hadn't locked it. Who would even come this far in a storm like this? Jason, oblivious to his mother's unease, stood up from the couch and shuffled toward the door. "I'll get it, Mom," he said, his small voice breaking through Kathy's anxiety. "Jason, no." Kathy rushed forward, grabbing his arm to stop him. But the little boy was already at the door, his curiosity winning out over her fears. Before Kathy could stop him, Jason flung open the door, the wind whipping it back with force. There, standing in the doorway, was a man, nearly collapsing from the weight of the storm. His face was pale, lips tinged with blue from the cold. A heavy leather jacket and worn jeans clung to his body, but they looked like they barely offered any protection from the biting wind. His boots were caked with snow, and his eyes were wide with desperation. I'm sorry," the man said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I need shelter. Please." Jason, unafraid, stared up at the stranger. Without hesitation, he took a step forward and reached out, his little hand gripping the man's arm. "Come in," Jason said, his words filled with the innocent sincerity only a 5-year-old could offer. "I'll care for you." Kathy stood frozen for a moment, caught between the boy's trust and her fear. She had always taught Jason to be kind to others, but she also knew the world was full of dangers. And yet, looking at Jason's trusting face, she couldn't bring herself to turn the man away. She stepped forward slowly, her voice shaky. "Please come inside. You're safe here." The man stumbled into the warmth of the house, and Kathy quickly closed the door behind him, blocking out the wind and snow. He collapsed into a nearby chair, breathing heavily, his face pale and drawn. Kathy rushed to grab a blanket from the couch, draping it over his shoulders, then hurried to the kitchen to put on some water for tea. Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. A stranger, a man she didn't know, had come into her home in the middle of a storm. As she worked, Kathy couldn't help but notice how worn the man looked, how deeply his body seemed to sag with exhaustion. His eyes were tired, haunted even, and his hands shook as he tried to adjust his coat. Despite the cold, his hands were clammy with sweat. She glanced over her shoulder, her curiosity getting the best of her. "Are you all right?" she asked, though the question felt too small for the moment. The man looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers with a certain intensity. He nodded, but didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was gruff but sincere. "I'm Andrew Gillespie." He paused, swallowing hard, as if the words themselves were hard to get out. "I'm part of a motorcycle club, Hell's Angels." Kathy froze, a knot tightening in her stomach. She had heard of them, of course. Who hadn't? The Hell's Angels were notorious, their reputation known for violence and chaos. The very name sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to keep her composure. "You're with them?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though a part of her wondered if she should have kept the door shut. Andrew nodded. "Yeah, I know what you're thinking, but not all of us are like what they say. Some of us just need a place to heal." Kathy didn't know how to respond. Her thoughts raced, as she handed him a steaming mug of tea. Part of her was terrified, yet another part felt sympathy for him. He was human, after all, and clearly struggling. He had come to her for help, just as she had once wished someone would come to her. "Well," she said softly, offering him a gentle smile, "you're safe here for now." Andrew gave a weak smile back, his eyes softening as he took the mug from her. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. The warmth from the tea spread through his body, and Kathy finally allowed herself to sit down across from him. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the small fire that burned in the corner. Jason, ever the curious child, had returned to his toy tools, trying to fix something that didn't need fixing. The storm continued to rage outside, but at that moment, Kathy couldn't help but wonder if this stranger, this man from a world so different from hers, might be the one to change everything for them. Have you ever extended kindness to a stranger, only to have it change your life in ways you never expected? Share your thoughts below, and if you're enjoying this story, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who could use a reminder of the power of kindness. The storm raged on, but the warmth inside Kathy's small house offered a welcome reprieve from the fury outside. Jason, still preoccupied with his toy tools, occasionally glanced at the man sitting across from them. Andrew had settled in, the firelight dancing off his rugged features, and the tea seemed to be doing him some good. His breathing had steadied, and his hands no longer shook as much, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke of battles fought long before the storm had arrived at their doorstep. Kathy watched him closely, wondering what had led him to this moment. The words "Hell's Angels" still echoed in her mind, and a part of her remained cautious, unsure of what to make of the man sitting in her living room. But another part, the part that was so used to struggling, saw something in Andrew that reminded her of herself, a person trying to survive in a world that didn't seem to care. After a few moments of silence, Andrew cleared his throat, his gaze flickering between Kathy and Jason. "I'm sorry for barging in on you like this," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "I wasn't sure where else to go. The storm's bad, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it." Kathy nodded, unsure of how to respond. "You're safe here," she said simply, offering him a small but genuine smile. She gestured to the fire and then to the small stack of blankets piled on the couch. "I'm just glad you made it." Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her gaze. "I wasn't always like this," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to be someone who could take care of myself, someone who had a purpose." The words hung in the air for a moment before Andrew spoke again, as if the weight of them had been pressing on him for far too long. "I was a medic in the Army," he began, his voice steadier now. "Did tours overseas, mostly in places you don't really want to know about. After that, I found myself drifting. I didn't know what to do with my life anymore. So, I ended up with the Hells Angels. Not for the reasons most people think. It's not about the violence or the chaos. It's about brotherhood. It's about having a place where you're not just forgotten." Kathy listened intently, her heart tightening as Andrew's words painted a picture of a man who had seen too much and lost too much along the way. She knew that feeling, the one that came with a life full of struggles and few answers. Jason, sensing the shift in the mood, looked up from his toys and crawled over to sit on the floor next to Andrew. The man's eyes softened at the sight of the small child, and Kathy saw something in his face shift, something vulnerable. "Being in the Army," Andrew continued, his voice cracking slightly, "I thought I could handle anything. But what I saw, what I did, it changes you. You can't just forget it, no matter how hard you try." His eyes drifted to the fire, but Kathy could see the pain there, the weight of memories too heavy to carry. "I thought joining the Hells Angels would give me something to hold on to. But even there, I felt empty. It's hard to explain." Kathy's chest tightened as she looked at him. She had known what it was like to feel alone, to feel like nothing would ever be enough to fill the void. But she also knew what it was like to hold on to hope, no matter how small. She leaned forward slightly. I get it, she said softly, her voice steady. You think that if you just keep moving, if you just keep going, the pain will fade. But it doesn't. It stays with you. Andrew nodded, his gaze meeting hers for the first time. There was something about his eyes, tired, haunted, yet searching, that made Kathy feel like they were speaking the same language, even though their worlds couldn't have been more different. Jason, ever the innocent, broke the silence. He stood up and reached out a small hand toward Andrew. You're okay now, he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Mom says everything's better when we help each other. Andrew stared at the boy for a moment, his expression softening. For a brief instant, Kathy saw a flicker of something familiar in his eyes, something that looked like the man he used to be before the army, before the club, before the weight of the world crushed him. The look lasted only a moment, but it was enough for Kathy to see that there was more to Andrew than the hardened exterior he had built around himself. Yeah, Andrew said quietly, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. Maybe he's right. The storm outside continued to howl, but inside there was a moment of peace, however brief. Kathy sat back, watching Andrew and Jason, and felt something stir deep inside her. A sense of connection, of understanding that she hadn't felt in a long time. I know what it's like to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, she said, her voice quiet but firm. And I know how hard it is to let anyone in, to let anyone help. But sometimes that's the only thing that gets you through. Andrew didn't respond immediately, but Kathy could see him processing her words. For a long moment, there was only the crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of the storm outside. Finally, Andrew stood up, his movements slower than before, but still purposeful. I need to go, he said, his voice low. The storm's letting up, and I've got to get going before it gets worse. Kathy felt a pang of disappointment. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but a part of her had hoped that this moment of connection might last longer, that Andrew might stay, that they might be able to share more than just this fleeting encounter. But Andrew was already reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out an envelope and handing it to Kathy. Here, he said, this is for you. I didn't know how else to say thank you. You saved me tonight, and I won't forget it. Kathy took the envelope, confused. It was small and thick, and there was a note inside, but she didn't open it right away. Instead, she looked at Andrew, trying to read his expression, but he was already heading for the door. Take care of yourself, Andrew said, his voice softer now. And take care of him, he nodded toward Jason. He's a good kid. And then, just like that, he was gone. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, leaving Kathy standing in the warmth of her living room, the envelope still clutched in her hands. She stared at the door for a long time, unsure of what had just happened. Had she really connected with this man? Had she really made a difference? Finally, she opened the envelope and found a small sum of money inside, along with a note that read, You saved me tonight. I won't forget. Kathy felt a lump rise in her throat. She wasn't sure what Andrew meant by those words, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger, this man from a world so different from hers, had come into their lives for a reason. And as the storm finally began to subside, Kathy realized that it wasn't just the storm outside that had been raging. It was the storm inside her too, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the calm after the chaos. Have you ever had a conversation with a stranger that made you see the world differently? Share your experience below, and if you're enjoying the story, hit subscribe and pass it along to someone who could use a little light in their life. The storm had passed, but the heavy silence that followed lingered, pressing down on Kathy's small house. The wind no longer howled through the cracks in the walls, but the cold still clung to everything, seeping into the corners of the room like an unwelcome guest. Kathy stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered streets, feeling the weight of everything pressing on her chest. The house, while warmer now, still felt like a cage. A temporary relief, but nothing had truly changed. Jason sat on the couch, his eyes wide with curiosity as he played with his toys, unfazed by the world around him. To him, the storm had been just another adventure, another story to tell. Kathy watched him, a flicker of warmth filling her heart. Jason's laughter, his innocence, was a balm for the wounds she could no longer hide from. She smiled softly, grateful for his presence, but the moment was fleeting. She turned away from the window and glanced at the envelope that Andrew had left behind. The money inside wasn't much, but it was something that would stretch just a little further than the crumpled bill she had left in her purse. She hadn't opened it yet. Her fingers had lingered on the edge of the envelope, hesitant. It felt almost too good to be true, like some kind of sign from the universe. But Kathy had learned not to trust in signs. She had learned to trust only in what she could see, what she could touch. With a sigh, Kathy opened the envelope. Inside, there was a small stack of bills, a little more than she had expected. The note was simple, written in a hurried hand. "You saved me tonight. I won't forget." The words stung. They were kind, yes, but they carried an unexpected weight. Kathy didn't know what to make of it. Was Andrew just being polite? Was this his way of paying her back for her kindness? Or was there something more? She could only imagine the life he had led, the hardships he had endured, but she couldn't help but wonder if his promise to return meant something deeper. Could it be more than gratitude? Could it be a chance for something better? She shook her head, trying to push the thought aside. The future was always uncertain, and Kathy had learned not to expect too much. Still, the promise of help lingered in her mind, a tiny thread of hope she couldn't quite let go of. She glanced down at the small sum of money in her hand and quickly calculated how far it would stretch. It wasn't enough to pay the rent, not even close, but it would buy food for the next few days, enough to last until her next shift at the diner. For a moment, the weight of her reality felt just a little lighter. She wasn't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. The bills were still piling up, and the future still seemed bleak. But for the first time in a while, she felt like she could take a breath, if only for a moment. Kathy set the money down on the counter and moved to the kitchen. She could hear Jason in the other room, humming to himself as he played. Her little boy, so full of life and joy despite the world they lived in. She envied him sometimes, the way he could find happiness in the smallest things. Kathy had long since lost that ability. As she pulled out the last of the bread, she reminded herself that they were okay for now. They had food for the next few days. They had warmth, at least for a while. And she had Jason. He was everything. The days blurred together, each one a mixture of long hours at the diner, cleaning for extra cash, and worrying about the future. Kathy was exhausted, but she had learned to live with exhaustion. It had become a part of her, like the endless pile of bills on the kitchen table and the stack of unpaid rent notices that she tried not to look at too often. Jason, on the other hand, was a constant reminder of what it meant to keep going. His laughter filled the house, even when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. Jason had an endless supply of optimism, as though he believed that tomorrow would always be better than today. And in some ways, Kathy envied that. She wished she could see the world through his eyes, wished she could find joy in the little things again. But she had long since lost that innocence. And as much as she wanted to, Kathy couldn't go back. She couldn't forget the years of struggle, the constant fight to make ends meet, to hold it all together. Yet, even in the midst of it all, she held on to hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that night, as she tucked Jason into bed, her mind returned to Andrew's promise. The words echoed in her head. "I won't forget." Did he really mean it? Or was it just something he said out of gratitude? Kathy didn't know. But as she kissed Jason goodnight and pulled the covers up around him, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that something might change. That Andrew might return, that the kindness they had shown him might lead to something more than just a fleeting act of charity. The next morning, Kathy woke early, her body sore from another restless night. The sun was barely rising, the sky still dark with the remnants of the storm. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the day already heavy on her shoulders. Jason was still asleep in his room, his breathing soft and steady. Kathy glanced at the envelope on the counter again, but this time her mind felt clearer. She wasn't going to let herself rely on a promise she couldn't count on. She had her own strength, her own resilience. She didn't need anyone to come save her. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if Andrew's promise would be the start of something more. She would hold on to it for now, just a little longer. As the day stretched on and the hours ticked by, Kathy couldn't shake the thought of Andrew's words. She kept telling herself not to get her hopes up, that nothing would change. But inside, a small spark of anticipation began to flicker. And for the first time in a long time, Kathy allowed herself to wonder if something was finally on the horizon. Have you ever found yourself holding on to a small promise, hoping it would lead to something better? Share your thoughts below, and if this story is resonating with you, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who could use a little hope today. The days following Andrew's unexpected visit passed in a strange blur. Kathy had returned to the grind, her shifts at the diner, the long hours spent cleaning for extra cash, and the constant hum of worry that never quite left her mind. She still had the envelope, and each time her eyes lingered on it, a small part of her believed that Andrew's promise might mean something. But the other part of her, practical, worn down from years of struggle, reminded her not to expect too much. It was probably just a gesture, a polite thank you from someone who had come and gone. Jason, as always, was the bright spot in her life. His laughter filled the small house, his energy infectious. He continued to find joy in the simplest things, like the way the light flickered in the kitchen when she made pancakes, or the way he could balance a spoon on his nose just to make her laugh. He had a way of making even the darkest days feel a little lighter. Yet, despite the moments of joy Jason provided, the tension never fully left. Every time Kathy checked the fridge or the stack of bills, the weight of reality came crashing back. The money Andrew had left her had been stretched thin, just enough to keep them afloat for a little while. But the thought of the future, of how long she could keep up the facade of everything being okay, gnawed at her. It was a Saturday afternoon when the first sign came. Jason had just finished his latest round of imaginary repairs, using his toy tools to fix the broken heater when Kathy heard it, a low rumble. At first, it seemed like nothing, just the hum of an ordinary day. But then it grew louder, like the growl of thunder from a distance, the kind that warns of something big approaching. Kathy paused, the sudden noise pulling her from her thoughts. She stood still, listening. Jason, sensing something different, ran to the window and pressed his small hands against the glass. "Mom, what's that sound?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. Kathy walked slowly to the window and peered out, squinting against the bright sunlight that filtered through the clouds. At first, she saw nothing, just the empty stretch of street, the snow still lingering in patches along the sidewalks. But then she heard it again, the rumbling louder now. Her heart skipped a beat as the sound intensified. It was coming closer and fast. Jason was jumping up and down by the window now. "Motorcycles! I hear motorcycles!" Kathy's stomach tightened. The rumble grew louder, shaking the ground beneath her feet until it was no longer distant but immediate, reverberating in her bones. She stepped closer to the window, her pulse quickening as the first line of motorcycles came into view, their chrome gleaming against the daylight. There was a moment, a long, breathless pause, where Kathy couldn't process what she was seeing. The street outside was no longer empty. It was filled, stretched as far as the eye could see, with row upon row of roaring motorcycles. A massive sea of black leather jackets and shining bikes, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Her breath caught in her throat. Jason, unable to contain his excitement, tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, look, it's like a parade." Kathy's heart pounded in her chest as she looked out the window, her mind racing to make sense of the scene unfolding before her. The motorcycles stretched out for what felt like miles. They weren't slowing down. They were coming toward her house, toward them. As the roar grew louder, she moved instinctively, reaching for Jason and pulling him back from the window. "Get away from the glass, Jason," she murmured, her voice shaking despite herself. "Stay back." But Jason, filled with excitement and completely unaware of the gravity of the situation, grinned from ear to ear. "Mom, look, it's so cool. They're all coming here." Kathy's mind was spinning. She had no idea who all these people were or what they wanted. And yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the sense that this moment was linked to Andrew, the promise he had made, the promise that still sat in the back of her mind like a faint, distant hope. But what was all this? Was it really happening? Was this the moment Andrew had meant when he said he wouldn't forget? Suddenly, Kathy saw a familiar figure at the front of the pack, a tall man with a strong, weathered face, his black leather jacket adorned with patches. It was Andrew. He was riding at the head of the pack, his eyes scanning the street ahead of him with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched him approach, the thrum of his motorcycle matching the pounding of her heart. As he came closer, he raised his hand in a wave, and the group of bikers behind him began to slow down, filing in behind him like soldiers following a leader. They stopped just in front of her house, and, for a moment, there was complete silence. The sound of the motorcycles faded, leaving only the heavy, quiet beat of Kathy's heart in her ears. She stood frozen, staring out the window, unsure of what to do next. Then Andrew dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He walked toward the door, his steps purposeful and steady. Kathy's feet felt like lead as she took a step back, her mind racing. Why had they come? What did this mean? Before she could say anything, Andrew reached the door. He knocked once, loud and clear. Kathy's hands trembled as she slowly opened it, her breath catching in her throat when she saw him standing there, flanked by a sea of bikers behind him. "Andrew," Kathy whispered, her voice barely audible. He smiled, his face softer now than the last time she saw him, and his eyes held a warmth she hadn't expected. "I told you I wouldn't forget," he said, his voice low but steady. "We've come to repay you for the kindness you showed me that night. We're here to help you rebuild." Kathy stood in the doorway, her mind unable to process his words. Before she could respond, Andrew motioned to the bikers behind him. "This is just the beginning," he said, his tone full of conviction. "We're not here for a visit. We're here to transform your life." As the bikers began unloading supplies, tools, and materials, Kathy felt her legs give way, and she sank into the doorframe, still struggling to comprehend what was happening. 1,500 Hell's Angels had arrived at her doorstep, and they weren't just passing through. They were here to change everything. Have you ever had someone come into your life unexpectedly, changing everything with just a few simple words or actions? Share your experience below, and if you're captivated by this story, be sure to subscribe and share it with others. Kathy stood there in the doorway, still reeling from the sight of 1,500 Hell's Angels outside her house. She had never imagined anything like this, never thought that kindness could come in such an overwhelming wave. For a moment, she simply watched as Andrew led the group of bikers into her small front yard. They moved with purpose, unloading equipment, materials, and tools she barely recognized. The roar of the motorcycles had faded into the background, replaced by the rhythmic sound of hammers, saws, and the steady shuffle of boots on the cold ground. It was as if an army had descended upon her home, and yet, somehow, it felt more like an act of grace than anything else. Her heart raced as she watched the bikers work with surprising precision, their coordinated movements a sharp contrast to the disarray that had characterized her life for so long. They weren't here just for a visit. They were here to rebuild, to transform her world. and, in a way, to transform her entire life. Andrew approached her, his eyes soft but firm. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice low. "But we don't just fix houses, Kathy. We fix lives." Kathy could barely respond. Her throat was tight, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. This was so much more than she had ever imagined. She had helped Andrew that night out of the goodness of her heart, not expecting anything in return, certainly not this. She had no idea what to say or do. The bikers spread out across the yard, bringing in wood, insulation, and even new appliances, things Kathy hadn't dared to dream of owning in years. They were all working in tandem, their movements fluid like a well-oiled machine. The smell of fresh wood and paint filled the air, mingling with the chilly winter breeze. Kathy took a hesitant step back from the door, feeling as if she were in a dream. This couldn't be real. How could it be? What had she done to deserve this? Andrew followed her inside, closing the door behind him gently. He looked at her with a calmness that only seemed to heighten her sense of confusion. "This isn't just about fixing your house," he said. "It's about something bigger. A network of people like us, who've been through hell and come out the other side, and now we're paying it forward. Helping people like you who need it." Kathy swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the words. She wanted to say something, anything, but her mind felt like a jumble of emotions. This was all too much, and yet the quiet sincerity in Andrew's voice grounded her. "You're not alone anymore," Andrew added softly. "We're here to make sure you never have to feel like you're fighting this battle by yourself." The words hung in the air for a moment. Kathy looked at him, her mind racing. She wanted to ask questions, to know more about this network he had mentioned, but she couldn't seem to find the words. All she knew was that these bikers, men and women she had once feared, were here to help. They had no reason to, no obligation. And yet, they were doing it with no strings attached. Outside, the sounds of hammers and drills became louder as the bikers worked. Kathy moved slowly toward the kitchen, the envelope of money from Andrew still clutched in her hand. She hadn't counted it yet, didn't want to, but now, watching them work, seeing the kindness in their faces, she knew it wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the gesture, the sheer magnitude of it, that left her speechless. Andrew stood in the doorway, watching her with a knowing expression. "Let me show you what we're doing," he said, his voice gentle but insistent. Kathy nodded, still unable to fully process the magnitude of what was happening, but following him toward the back of the house where the most damage had been done. The roof, which had leaked for months, was now being stripped down and replaced by a team of bikers who worked efficiently despite the cold. As Kathy walked through the house, she saw the transformation unfold before her eyes. The walls, once stained and cracked, were being repainted, their chipped surfaces now covered in fresh coats of white. The kitchen, which had been bare and cold, was already beginning to take shape. New countertops, a fresh coat of paint, and brand new appliances. Kathy's heart swelled with gratitude, but also with a strange sense of disbelief. This wasn't just about fixing her house. This was about rebuilding her life, piece by piece. In the living room, one of the bikers, a woman with short blonde hair and a face marked by years of hardship, looked up as Kathy entered. She paused for a moment, setting down her tools. "Hey there," the woman said, giving Kathy a warm, knowing smile. "We're making good progress. Hope you're okay with what we're doing." Kathy blinked, still processing everything. I don't even know what to say," she admitted, her voice catching. I never thought something like this could happen to me." The woman smiled again, her eyes softening. "It happens when you least expect it," she said. "We've all been where you are. Trust me, I know what it feels like to be stuck in a place where you think no one cares. But there's always a way out. You just have to let people in." Kathy didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, this level of generosity. She had always been the one to give, to help, but never like this. It was hard for her to accept, but she was beginning to see the truth in the woman's words. As she turned to leave the room, Andrew's voice stopped her. "Kathy," he called softly. She looked back at him, and he met her gaze with a quiet intensity. "This is what we do. We're not just bikers. We're a family, and we help those who need it." Kathy's chest tightened, and for the first time since they'd arrived, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of connection. Maybe, just maybe, this was what she and Jason had been missing all along. The bikers worked late into the evening, and by the time they packed up, Kathy's house had been transformed. It was no longer the cold, run-down place it had been. It was warm, functional, and filled with hope. The roof no longer leaked, the walls were fresh, and the kitchen looked like a space where meals could be shared in comfort. As the last biker left, Andrew turned to Kathy. "We'll be back tomorrow," he said, his voice steady. "We've got more to do, but for now, I want you to know you're not alone anymore. We're here for you." Kathy nodded, her heart full. She hadn't asked for any of this, but here it was, a gift, a lifeline, a second chance. And as she closed the door behind them, she realized something she hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just about rebuilding a house. It was about rebuilding her life. And for the first time in a long time, Kathy allowed herself to believe that it was possible. Have you ever been given something you didn't expect? Something that changed the course of your life? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe. That is the only way you can be sure to stay connected with thrilling stories like this. The transformation of Kathy's house was nearly complete. Over the next few days, the bikers worked tirelessly, and Kathy could hardly believe her eyes. The roof was repaired, the leaks sealed, the walls now a fresh, bright white instead of the peeling paint and cracks that had once made her feel trapped in a world of decay. The kitchen, once a cold and empty space, now hummed with life, outfitted with a new stove, fridge, and countertops. The entire house felt different, like a weight had been lifted, like it was finally a place to live rather than just survive. Yet, despite the physical changes, Kathy knew the real work, the deeper work, was still to come. Her life, her past, had not been fixed by new appliances or fresh paint. That part of her remained, the memories and scars that still had the power to make her feel small, unworthy, and afraid of what was to come. As the bikers continued their work, Kathy found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She'd always been the one to take care of others, to protect Jason from the harsh realities of life. But now she found herself in the strange position of allowing others into her world. Jason, for his part, was thriving. He had quickly bonded with several of the bikers, especially a man named Pete, who had a gentle demeanor despite his intimidating appearance. Pete had a kind smile and a patience that Jason responded to. The two of them spent hours together in the yard, working on little projects that kept Jason's curious mind engaged. Kathy watched from the kitchen window as Pete showed Jason how to fix a small broken fence, explaining each step in a way that Jason could understand. The boy listened intently, asking questions and absorbing everything like a sponge. Kathy couldn't help but smile at the sight. She hadn't seen Jason so at ease in a long time. Pete had a way of bringing out the best in him, and she could see that he genuinely cared. The bikers, she was beginning to realize, were not what she had initially thought. They weren't just a group of men and women in leather jackets. They were people who had been through their own struggles, just like her, and had somehow found a way to heal by helping others. One afternoon, as the last of the renovations were finishing up, Andrew approached Kathy. He had always been around, supervising the work, offering guidance to the bikers. But today he seemed more serious than usual. Kathy had gotten used to seeing him in his usual role, calm, composed, and a little mysterious. But today, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that made her pause. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Kathy nodded, leading him to the corner of the living room where they could have a moment of quiet. "I'm not sure what you've been thinking about all this," Andrew began, "but I wanted to share something with you. Something I haven't told you yet." Kathy looked up at him, waiting for him to continue. He was clearly struggling with something, his usual confidence replaced by something raw. "I wasn't always like this," Andrew said quietly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I joined the Hells Angels when I was younger, thinking it would give me a purpose, a sense of belonging. But it wasn't until I started helping people that I realized I was broken, just like everyone else. I didn't know how to fix myself, but somehow, helping others became my way of healing. Every time I gave someone a hand, it felt like I was putting myself back together, like I was finding redemption." Kathy felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much of Andrew's own pain he had carried with him. She had seen him as strong, but now she understood that his strength came from the same place hers did. The struggle to survive, the need to heal, the fear of facing a broken past. "I don't know if I'm the right person to be offering advice," Andrew continued, "but I know one thing. Helping others is the only way to heal. When you take care of someone else, you end up taking care of yourself too. I've seen it happen over and over again with the people we help. And I see it in you, Kathy." Kathy swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life trying to make things work on her own, never asking for help, never truly allowing herself to lean on anyone. And now, here was Andrew, a man who had found healing through helping others, offering her the same thing. "I'm scared," Kathy whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared I won't be able to do it. I don't know how I'm supposed to raise Jason alone. I don't know how to provide for him. How do I keep going when I don't know what's next?" Andrew's eyes softened as he reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to have all the answers, Kathy. None of us do. But you've already done something incredible. You've survived, and you've raised Jason. You're doing better than you think." Kathy looked up at him, feeling a swell of emotion rise in her chest. "But I'm still so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of failing him. Afraid of not being enough." Andrew nodded, understanding. "That's the thing, though. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. You've already done that. And you have a community now. You're not alone." Kathy felt the tears welling up, but she blinked them back quickly. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she said, gesturing to the house, to the bikers, to everything that had changed in such a short time. "You don't have to know everything," Andrew replied, his voice steady. "Just trust that you're on the right path. We're here for you, Kathy. You have more strength inside you than you realize." The words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time, she felt like someone truly saw her, like they understood the weight she had been carrying. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she could keep going. Not because she had all the answers, but because she didn't have to do it alone. As the bikers finished their work, Kathy's home transformed into something more than just a place to live. It became a symbol of the support she had found, the community she had unknowingly embraced. And more than that, it became a place of healing, a place where Kathy could begin to rebuild not just the physical structure of her life, but her spirit, her hope, and her belief that there was still a future worth fighting for. Have you ever had to confront your deepest fears in order to move forward? Share your thoughts below. The final day of the renovations arrived with an unexpected quiet. The bikers, who had spent the past week transforming Kathy's home, packed up their tools, cleaned up the yard, and prepared to leave. It felt almost surreal, like they had never been there, and yet the house was unrecognizable. It had gone from a cold, dilapidated shell to a warm, functional home, a place Kathy could finally see herself living in, not just surviving. The old, sagging roof had been replaced, the walls painted in soft, welcoming colors, and the kitchen now gleamed with brand-new appliances. The air inside no longer carried the scent of dampness or decay. It was fresh, filled with the subtle warmth of a home that had just been brought back to life. Kathy stood in the doorway, watching as the bikers made their final rounds, exchanging goodbyes and promises to stay in touch. Jason, as usual, was running around, full of energy and excitement. He had made friends with nearly every biker who had worked on the house, and they treated him like a little brother, always stopping to share a laugh or offer him a high five. Kathy couldn't remember the last time she had seen him this happy, this free. Andrew approached her as the last biker pulled away, his expression as calm as ever. But there was something different about him now, something softer in his eyes. "It's done," he said simply, his voice carrying a weight of finality, but also a sense of relief. Kathy nodded, her heart full. "I can't believe it," she whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it real. "I didn't think this would ever happen. It feels like a dream." Andrew smiled. "I told you we'd take care of you, and we've only just begun." Kathy turned to face him, her mind still racing. "You've done more than enough." She stopped herself, not knowing how to put her gratitude into words. "You're part of our family now," Andrew said, his voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to do this alone, Kathy. You never have to feel like you're alone again." The sincerity in his words, the weight of them, settled in Kathy's chest. She had always felt like she was carrying the world alone, like she had to keep pushing forward, no matter how heavy the burden. But now, she realized something had shifted. The weight wasn't as heavy anymore. She had people who cared, people who had shown up when she needed them most. She didn't have to carry everything alone. As the day went on, Kathy and Andrew sat down at the kitchen table, the two of them alone for the first time in what felt like ages. The bikers had finished their work, and the house was finally quiet. Jason was playing outside, his laughter echoing from the yard, but the moment felt still, full of possibility. "I've been thinking," Andrew said, breaking the silence. "You've got this place now. It's yours, but it's more than just a house. You've got a gift here, Kathy, and I think it's time for you to start using it." Kathy frowned, unsure of what he meant. "A gift? What do you mean?" "You're cooking," Andrew said, leaning forward, his gaze focused. "You've got a talent. I can see in the way you talk about food, the way you light up when you mention your mother's recipes. You've always been taking care of people. Maybe it's time for you to do it in a different way." Kathy blinked, surprised. "You think I should start a business? A restaurant or something?" Andrew nodded. "A small cafe, maybe. Nothing fancy. Just a place where people can come for a warm meal, a kind word. It could be the kind of place where people feel like they belong. You could build a future for yourself and Jason. And we'll help. We'll spread the word. You got a whole community behind you now, Kathy." Her mind raced. A cafe? She had always dreamed of something like that. A small, cozy place where she could cook for others and make them feel at home. But it always felt like an impossible dream, too big for her, too far out of reach. But now, with the house transformed with the support of Andrew and the Hells Angels, it didn't feel so impossible anymore. Maybe this was the new beginning she had been waiting for. "I don't know where to start," Kathy said, her voice hesitant. "I don't even have the money to buy supplies, let alone set up a business." Andrew smiled. "That's where we come in. We'll help get you started. We know people, Kathy. We've got the connections. We'll make sure you have what you need to get this thing off the ground." Kathy felt a rush of emotion, fear, excitement, hope. She could see it now. The cafe, warm and bustling with people, a place where Jason could grow up surrounded by community, a place where Kathy could finally put her skills to use in a way that mattered. The thought of it overwhelmed her, and yet for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. It felt possible, and that feeling, that spark of possibility, was enough to make her believe it might actually happen. Later that afternoon, as Kathy stood in her new kitchen, preparing dinner for Jason, she reflected on how far she had come. The kitchen, which had once seemed like just another broken part of her life, now felt like a symbol of everything she had worked so hard for. It was a place of growth, of healing, of new beginnings. The scent of food filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, Kathy felt at peace. Jason came running into the kitchen, his face flushed from playing outside. "Mom, can we eat soon? I'm starving." Kathy smiled, placing the pot on the stove. "Of course, baby. Dinner's almost ready." As she set the table, she looked around at the kitchen, at the house, and at her son, who was now sitting at the table, ready to eat. This wasn't just a meal. It was a promise that things could change, a promise that, with the right people by her side, Kathy could build something real, something lasting. The bikers were gone, but their impact on her life would remain. They had given her more than just a home. They had given her the strength to believe in herself again. The sun had set on the small town, and Kathy Castillo stood at the window, watching the fading light cast long shadows across the yard. The house, now warm and vibrant, felt like a different place, a place where dreams could take root, where a future could be built. Jason sat at the kitchen table, drawing with his crayons, completely unaware of how much his life had changed. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that broke the quiet, but Kathy's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. It had been weeks since the bikers had finished the renovations, since they'd left, promising to check in on her every now and then. Life had begun to feel normal again, as though the past year's struggles had been erased by a simple act of kindness. And yet, Kathy knew that this was more than just a new house. It was more than the repairs, more than the coats of paint and the shiny new appliances. This was about community, about the people who had stepped into her life when she had felt invisible, offering her a chance to heal and rebuild in ways she never thought possible. The cafe was beginning to take shape, too. With the help of Andrew and the other bikers, Kathy had found the resources to get started. The little storefront, just a few blocks away from her house, had been cleaned up and remodeled. Kathy had used the small amount of money Andrew had left her to buy the first batch of ingredients, and soon, with the help of some local volunteers, she was ready to open the doors. The dream she'd kept hidden for so long, her own place, a small cafe where she could serve food and share warmth with others, was finally becoming a reality. And yet, even with all this progress, Kathy still found herself standing at that window, looking out at the world with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. She wasn't just grateful for the house or the cafe or the community that was slowly gathering around her. She was grateful for the people who had shown her the power of kindness, who had taught her that she wasn't alone in the world. Jason suddenly appeared at her side, his small hand reaching up to tug at her sleeve. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, yet full of curiosity, "are we family now?" Kathy's heart swelled at the innocence in his words. She knelt down to his level, her hands gently resting on his shoulders. Jason's wide eyes were filled with a mixture of excitement and hope. "What do you mean, baby?" she asked, her voice tender. "Well," Jason began, his small voice thoughtful, "the bikers are always helping us, and they said we're part of their family. So, are we really family now?" Kathy's breath caught in her throat. She had never really thought about it in those terms, but as she looked into Jason's innocent face, she realized that he had understood something she hadn't fully grasped. They were no longer just two isolated souls, struggling to survive. They had become part of something bigger, a family built not on blood, but on kindness, loyalty, and mutual support. Kathy smiled, her eyes filled with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but strong. "We are family now. The bikers, they've shown us what it means to be a family. And now we're part of that. They'll always be there for us, just like we'll be there for them." Jason grinned, his face lighting up with joy. "Hey," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around her in a tight hug. Kathy hugged him back, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her heart. This was the family she had always wanted, the one that didn't just survive, but thrive, supported by love and compassion. As Jason pulled away and returned to his drawings, Kathy's thoughts turned inward. The past months had been a whirlwind, but as she stood there, watching her son, she realized how much had changed. From the moment the storm had trapped them in their home, Kathy had felt hopeless, as though the weight of the world had pushed her to the edge. She had been alone, isolated, struggling to make it through each day, unsure of how to provide for Jason, let alone give him the life she wanted for him. But now, with the support of the Hell's Angels and her new family, everything felt different. She had her own home, a new business, and, most importantly, a sense of community. She no longer felt like she was fighting a battle by herself. She had people who cared, people who showed up when she needed them most. And in return, she was ready to show up for herself, to build a future that was brighter than she had ever imagined. Kathy thought back to Andrew's words, the promise he had made that night when he'd first arrived at her doorstep. He had told her that they weren't just there to fix her house. They were there to transform her life. And in so many ways, they had. The bikers had given her more than just a roof over her head. They had given her hope, the strength to face her fears, and the belief that she wasn't alone. As Kathy stood in the kitchen later that evening, preparing a simple meal for Jason, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The kitchen, once a cold, empty space, was now a symbol of all that she had fought for. It was warm, filled with the smells of food and love, a place where she could create new memories and nourish not just her body, but her soul. She thought of all the people who would soon walk through the doors of her cafe, seeking a warm meal, a moment of kindness, and maybe even a sense of belonging. In that moment, Kathy realized that she had been given a gift far greater than a home or a business. She had been given the strength to build a future for herself and Jason, one where they could truly thrive, surrounded by people who cared. As she set the table for dinner, she felt a quiet sense of certainty settle within her. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face, she knew they wouldn't face them alone. They had a family now, one that was built on kindness, on shared struggle, and on the unwavering belief that together they could Have you ever experienced the power of community when you least expected it? Share your thoughts below, and if this story has touched you, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who could use a reminder that we're all stronger together.